My name is Dean Sickler. I'm the Commercial Education Specialist at Golden Paintworks. Today I'd like to share with you some techniques for applying decorative plasters and textures that are much easier and forgiving for beginners to use. A lot of the problems we encounter in applying a smooth finish to walls is that most walls are not completely smooth and or have a lot of defects that become more noticeable with a shiny or polished finish. One way to overcome this is to apply a physical texture in uniform patches that will disguise and camouflage imperfections. The types of plasters and textures I'm talking about are ones that dry to a polished or reflective surface like Venetian plaster or metallic textures. These are responsive textures that become darker with pressure and burnishing. Let me provide some examples. Now this board is metallic texture applied with a sponge knockdown, and this is Venetian plaster applied with a skip trowel technique. Now I don't know anybody who uses the terms responsive textures, but that seems to be a good way to describe them, so that's what I use. It describes a texture or plaster that responds to pressure and friction to change color and become polished. There are many types of both natural and acrylic plasters that do this. The most common responsive textures that are acrylic-based are Venetian plaster and metallic textures. Plasters that are made from slake lime or cement are in a whole category by themselves, and I'm not going to cover them here. So let me demonstrate some full-on skip trowel, knockdown, and backfill techniques. And before I get started, let me point out now this side is going to be the Venetian plaster side, and this side is going to be metallic texture. I already have a base coat down here, which is the same color as my Venetian plaster final color. This is actually a coat of Venetian plaster. Here it's just a flat paint. You just want to make sure you use a flat paint as your base coat and do it in a color that's very similar to your final color of the texture. I'm going to be applying the actual skip trowel technique with a 6-inch spackling knife. I'll be dipping into the bucket with a 3-inch spackling knife. I could use a trowel, but I think it's easier for you to see how I do this with a smaller blade like this. So I'll start over here. Now it's important just to start with a small amount of material at a time. I have about maybe a thumb's worth on the blade here. And I want to just let it skip off the trowel, as you can see like this. Start off with it fairly light because you can always add more later, but once you add too much on here, it's hard to go back. So I'm going to fill in about 85–90% of my surface here with some of the texture. I want to keep the texture down pretty much as low as possible. I don't want to have a whole lot of physical texture on here. I put it on and then I'm going to knock it down a bit. You see, that's why it's called a knockdown. And let me start this side here and pull it in. I'm going over it again very gently to knock down the thick texture. Get a patch that's too thick, you can always take it off like this and then put it back on again. Okay, next I'll be working with metallic texture. This is called a sponge trowel knockdown. This side here, the color is called Cognac copper of the metallic texture I'm going to use. I'm going to use a dampened seawool sponge, a good size like this, and you find a nice flat surface you can dip this sponge into. And I'll be using a 6-inch spackling knife again to knock it down. You can't use a trowel because it's called a trowel knockdown, but this will show what I'm doing a little bit easier. So I want to, sometimes you may want to thin this plaster down a little bit, but we'll try it like this. Just take it and make sure it's turned on. Just do some dabs around like this. get some good texture on there. Do some blobs. Okay. Then take your spackling knife and very gently knock that down. Getting rid of any straight lines. Okay? Like that. There. Then just continue on. Okay. Very gentle pressure to begin with. You just gradually add more pressure as you need to. Again, if you get too much down on an area, you can always just take it up like this, put it back onto the sponge, do it again, and knock that down. You can make a larger movement if you want by just adding in larger blobs of actual material, like that. See? That'll make a larger blob, or you can do small ones like this. Either way, you want to make sure you keep it pretty consistent across the whole wall. So in that case, let me add a little bit bigger blob up here. Here we go. Take it right off. Okay. All different directions. The Venetian plaster is now dry, and I'm ready to put on the finished coat. As you can see, I put a color on top of color here, so the patches just about disappear when they're dry. Over here, I put the metallic texture down in patches over a colored base coat, so we have two different colors. Now, this is a look unto itself also, and you can do this with almost any kind of a texture. But what I want to do is I want to create an actual smooth finish with a visual texture. So I'm going to give a full coat on top of the Venetian plaster and also the metallic texture. So we'll start with the Venetian plaster. I'm going to switch to a small trowel now rather than a spackling knife because I can put this on a little bit faster and with more pressure with a small trowel than I can with a knife. I'll use the same color of Venetian plaster and I'll start applying it. Again, I'm working with a rather small amount of Venetian plaster. I do not want to overload my blade. Full coat this time, nice and tight. You want to make sure you take off any excess plaster and leave a very smooth finish on top of it. So you go over it well like this. Take off any excess plaster. sometimes you get the odd bit of color coming through on the plaster. You can just take and just rub that out. Take a little extra plaster and rub it out, this, and it'll come right out. As the Venetian plaster is starting to dry, you'll see it starting to get some matte spots on here. Now is a good time to go inside and start burnishing it because the texture is at its most delicate. Don't use too much pressure, but use enough that you can actually bring out some of that color. You can see you can really start bringing out some shine with it. Okay, then on this side we can give a final coat on top of the metallic texture with the same color as the sponge trowel knockdown. We want to make sure you have a good clean blade, no nicks or debris on the blade. And we apply it the same way as we did the Venetian plaster, fairly small amounts. Full coat. Take it off tight. The act of taking it off very tight is that's what brings out the actual visual texture. I'll be careful when you actually land the blade that you don't leave straight lines in it like this. Always keep the blade at an angle when you land it. And then before you move on, clean off your blade and go over it one more time just to flatten out any ridges. As the metallic texture is drying, I can come over and give the Venetian plaster a final polish. See how it shines up very nicely. The metallic texture is now dry and I've removed the tape. You can see the full beauty of the visual texture with smooth technique with the sponge trowel knockdown, and the, again, visual texture and very smooth finish with the skip trowel knockdown. Now these are very pragmatic names and not very sexy. They just describe the technique. I've heard these variously called Florentine lace and polished stone and French shimmer, etc. So please call it what you want. These are both very easy techniques to accomplish and forgiving. So please check out some of our other Golden Paintworks videos, and thanks for watching.